Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ian and Francis and the APC team for inviting me today to speak to you all. Really great event, and I'm glad that we've got a forum in which we can discuss some of these, the issues and the future, really, of manufacturing. So I'm going to start off with a bit of an introduction. So my name's Fred Perry. I'm the Director of Advanced Manufacturing at the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. For those of you who don't follow politics closely, our Secretary of State currently is Grant Shapps, who was, of course, Secretary of State at the Department for Transport, so probably known to kind of a great number of you in this room. And in my role, I'm accountable to the Secretary of State for a range of manufacturing issues which cover shipbuilding, marine, defense, aerospace, but also automotive and the CAM agenda. So there's an awful lot that I could get wrong in my job, but one of the things that I know is the critical success factor for me to get right is to be thinking about the future of manufacturing and how we as a country can shape our policy in such a way that we realize the benefits of that for society and for the economy. I think where this plays into today's discussion is that the two agendas which I see converging day in, day out in the discussions I have with industry and indeed kind of internally in government are around the auto electrification agenda and then the connected and autonomous mobility agenda. So that's what I'm going to cover a bit in the next 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to start with electrification and the auto agenda. I heard that this morning's session threw up quite a few barriers around cybersecurity, around propriety and ethics in terms of the CAM agenda and industry. But sort of moving us onto the upside, what I have on this slide from the team are the range of kind of economic benefits that we get from the UK's auto industry. And some of you might have noticed that there's been quite a lot of political turnover recently in government. But what is easy for me in my job is that when I'm briefing new ministers and trying to get them to prioritise my agenda, I'm able to show them this slide and just how important it is for the economy and how much value they will get from investing time and political capital in the agenda. And sort of from this slide, the two stats, I mean, there's loads of stats, but the two stats I was going to pull out was sort of 88% of employment outside London and the southeast for the auto kind of industry. And so it really plays to the levelling up agenda and the regional growth agenda, which, as you'll all appreciate, is a big sell. And the second is on the innovation potential side, and that the industry invest so much in R&D, 10.8% of our R&D in the country, second only to the pharma industry. And so whenever kind of ministers ask me about whether the auto industry is doing enough, I'm able to point to that stat and show them how much business is doing. The flip side of all that economic opportunity is that the big challenge for the industry, and indeed I think the challenge of our time and this decade, is net zero and the decarbonisation challenge. So what this slide is showing you in the various graphs is sort of on the left-hand side, what has happened with emissions in the UK across some of our key sectors. And you'll notice on there that the one that has stayed stubborn and sort of constant is the transport element. Now, you could argue about how these things are measured and whether overall is the UK sort of outsourcing, emissions overall, but the difficult fact for our industry is that that number has stayed constant right through to the latest data points that we have for 2019. And if you can see it, on the right-hand side, the chart there shows you just how much of a proportion of that transport total is down to automotive, HGVs, and vans. So a large part of what we do in industry is going to affect that huge part of our net zero agenda. So that's the big challenge alongside the big economic opportunity that I think we need to confront. So what are we doing about it? I think first and foremost, one of the jobs in government is to set the operating environment for industry. And I think what this slide shows is that since the Paris Agreement, which was COP21, we're on COP27 today, we have continued in government to think about our frameworks and evolve them to be increasingly ambitious so that we can try to stick to that ambition of maintaining overall global temperatures to within the 1.5 degree threshold. And coming right up to sort of the most recent kind of publications, things like the ZEV mandate have the potential to be hugely ambitious and to put the UK at the forefront of kind of global industry in terms of challenging the sector in a positive way, which shows that jointly industry and government are looking to be ambitious. What else are we doing about it? So there's the kind of operating environment, but then there's also the case for government intervention in different areas. And what this slide the team have put together shows is the sheer amount of funding that government is putting in across different institutions and across different parts of the ecosystem. So for those of you not familiar with this schema, what you have are the technological readiness levels. And so for very nascent technologies, you're looking at the left-hand side of the scale, right through to the right-hand scale, which is looking at the commercialization and deployment of technologies. And I think what you can see here is that we've got a real diversity of institutions in our industry, starting with places like the Faraday Institution, which I sponsor, into which we put a lot of R&D, right through onto the other side, the Automotive Transformation Fund, a capital fund for which I'm responsible, where we try to invest with industry to land gigafactories in an EV supply chain. And so when I'm pitching to investors alongside ministers, one of the things that I can show them is this. And some of the other bits of our sell are a bit more difficult, but this is one strong part of the UK offering that we can look at. So segueing a bit then to the CAM agenda, which, as I say, I think we've been treating a bit separately, but which ultimately we're going to need to bring together. So most of you, I think, will know that we have a Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles, which I oversee jointly with the Department for Transport. And that team has been working especially hard this year, and in particular to deliver the CAM vision and policy statement that came out, it was late summer, I think, in the end, when we published that. And what that does on the CAM side of the house, in terms of looking forwards, is we've set out now our vision statement, which I won't read out to people, but is about where we can get to as an industry by 2025 and starting to see deployments of self-driving vehicles. The other two elements are, one, legislation. So we've committed now to thinking about what is that regulatory environment we're going to need and to bringing forward a bill in Parliament when we can secure a slot so that we advance the regulatory side of the argument. And the other is funding. So we secured £100 million of R&D funding, part of which I deliver on the BASE side, which is about commercializing CAM. The other part, the 34 million, is with the DFT in terms of security and ensuring that we can safely deploy CAM. So that's where we're looking to. But it's worth saying, I think we come from a really strong starting position. So some of what's on this slide overlaps a bit with what I showed you about our kind of institutional kind of landscape on that slide I had previously about technological readiness levels. But what you've got here is that we already have come quite far away down the path on the regulatory route. So we had the Automated and Electric Vehicles Act in 2018. And on top of that, we've accepted many, or all, I think, of the 75, was it, Michael will correct me, recommendations of the law commissions. I got a thumbs up there, so I got the number right. So that we can bring forward a bill either via the Department for Transport or BASE to ensure that we have that in place. The other thing I'd point to in terms of our strengths right now is that bottom point on the integrated testbed ecosystem, which, having seen a lot of the testbeds in practice and visited internationally other countries to look at their kind of CAM landscape, I think globally unique, and again, a strength on which we should be capitalizing. But where are we today? So we don't have today self-driving vehicles on the road. And on this slide, you've got a number of the test cases that people talk about. But we're conscious of the standards that we're going to need to require before we get to that endpoint. And as such, there's a bit of a kind of approach, a dual approach of kind of evolution and revolution. And sort of on the kind of evolutionary side, we're looking more at things like private vehicles and whether there will be, self-lane driving, which we hope to bring in the private market next year, versus on the revolutionary side, to looking at things like off-road applications. So in kind of segregated areas, can we see if vehicles can work in, say, a mining context, so that we continue to look at revolutionary technological approaches as well. But before we get to that point that was in the vision about having a market where we have self-driving vehicles kind of on the road, we think there are kind of 5 key areas that we need to put in place, principles, to enable safe deployment. So one I've talked about a lot is the regulatory framework, but then on the kind of other side of things, the 3 I'm going to pick out are, one, that we need a strong UK industrial base. It's important, going back to the beginning of this presentation, that we realize the economic benefits and upside of this agenda in terms of jobs and value add. The second is demand. So these services have to be designed around what consumers want. And thirdly, people need to trust in CAM. And that's going to be an absolutely pivotal enabler to uptake across society. But I think there's then one more thing that we need in place, and that is to understand how CAM is going to affect our decarbonisation pathway. And this chart is one I love and hate. I won't sort of try and read out every single one of the things on this colour wheel, but essentially what the economists are doing in my team are thinking about the various ways that CAM could support decarbonisation, but also hinder it as well. So to take an example, it's possible, and we haven't quantified this yet, but that self-driving vehicles could have a greater number of empty miles, which wouldn't be a decarbonisation benefit. But at the same time, it could be that the ways in which we know the acceleration and deceleration is much improved with self-driving vehicles, that could be a massive benefit. And so what you get a bit from this chart is a sense of exactly how complex it is going to be to understand in the future business model the net effect that a self-driving system and infrastructure will have on decarbonisation. And so one of the real priorities for my team and the Centre for Connected and Autonomous Vehicles is to work through, can we start putting numbers to this wheel? Have we missed anything? And we're keen, I know we've done industry workshops on this already, but we're keen to continue up that conversation, because we know that we in government won't have all the answers to what that future looks like, given the vast uncertainty around it. So this last slide I have in the presentation comes back to the point around needing to win the sort of hearts and minds of consumers, and sort of describes a day we did where we had over 1,000 members of the public come to have a go at self-driving and see what the experience was like. And we collected a huge range of data on that experience, about what consumer attitudes were like. We need to do more of it, but one of the takes I have is that people are coming to the electric vehicle agenda with things like range anxiety, but then also the CAM agenda with huge uncertainty around what that will mean for them. Do they own a car or not? And that is a way we can bring those two agendas together in ensuring that the way we speak with the public and think about how we engage with them caters for those two kind of critical factors. So this is my kind of concluding slide. So what do the next 3 years look like? Do we think? So we think we've got that policy direction, both in terms of the CAM policy vision, but also in terms of an ambitious kind of zero emission vehicle kind of strategy that we have. We're bringing forward legislation and working with ministers to secure a slot in Parliament. We're spending money on commercialisation, quite a lot of government funding, which I fight for and fight to defend kind of every day to ensure that we have a proportionate amount to the ambitions that you all have in this room, as well as we in government. And then finally, that point on public understanding. So I think by way of conclusion, the kind of question of the overall session was kind of, is there going to be a future for self-driving? Is it a fantasy? To which I think the answer is a kind of, in a classic civil servant fashion, a caveated yes. So there's huge opportunity, economically, socially, environmentally, but, and there's a big but, we need to test to ensure that we roll out this technology in a responsible way, per the discussion I think you had this morning. And we also need to win the hearts and minds of the public in ensuring that they can see it as a safe way of traveling. That was going to be my presentation by way of conclusion. Stephen, thank you very much.